I'm here today with Lauren Sheets Jarrell, Vice President and Counsel Civil Justice for the American Tort Reform Association. Lauren, greatly appreciated, as I do every year. Thank you for coming and sharing, because we have an important topic here, the judicial hellholes, and you're the person with the list.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy our time together each year, and I'm happy to be back.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I'll tell you what, do you want to jump right into it? And we'll go to the slides.
Yes, let me pull them up. Okay. So this year's Judicial Hellholes report exposes 8 jurisdictions where lawsuit abuse has really reached alarming heights. There were record-breaking nuclear verdicts, pervasive junk science, and the courts were adopting expansive theories of liability. And as you'll see from the creative in this year's report, the theme was the plaintiff's lawyer's laboratory, because that is what we are seeing. The trial bar is targeting these plaintiff-friendly jurisdictions to bring novel theories of liability to really see what will stick, what gains traction in these courts, and then their successful theories they export across the country. And before we dive in, one of the main things that we really try to emphasize is that lawsuit abuse, the judicial hellholes list, really isn't just an issue for lawyers or the court system. It's an economic crisis that is impacting everyone. And according to a recent study, lawsuit abuse in the United States, not just in the hellholes that we're going to talk about today, is creating a tort tax, an individual tort tax of over $1,660 per person every year. So it's driving up costs, it's impacting consumers, and this number is exponentially higher in the judicial hellhole states. Additionally,
in this era of the key word in politics is affordability.
yes,
that is one of the key components in which no one talks about other than you folks.
Exactly. And so we really want to get people to realize that this is playing a role in the affordability crisis. Additionally, it eliminates almost 5 million jobs annually. So if we can get people to focus on lawsuit abuse and try to address some of these issues, it'll make a real difference for American families.
Absolutely.
So let's dig into the report, and I'll pull up this year's rankings.
Here goes the drum roll. Go ahead, Lauren.
Drum roll. As you will see, there is an important change at the top. After 2 years being number 1, the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas has dropped down the list and was replaced by Los Angeles. And California has always been a perennial hellhole, but this year we felt like we wanted to limit the designation to Los Angeles because the problems there have reached epic levels, and all of the issues that are plaguing the state of California are present in Los Angeles, and a lot of them are starting there, and they're on the cutting edge, really driving the problems that we see across the state. So just some of the issues that we highlighted in the report, number 1 was nuclear verdicts. This year, we saw, or 2025, we saw an eye-popping $1 billion verdict awarded in a talc case to a plaintiff, an 88-year-old plaintiff who was diagnosed with mesothelioma at 87 years old. With verdicts like these, it's no wonder that LA is the 3rd most popular venue for mesothelioma cases. We also saw a $50 million verdict in a spilled tea case against Starbucks. So it sort of echoes back to memories of that McDonald's spilled coffee case from decades ago. I guess Starbucks should feel lucky. The plaintiff's lawyers had asked for 75 million to 125 million. So 50 million's maybe better, but no, that was a really concerning verdict and just shows where we are. And nuclear verdicts is an issue that really is going to come up in all the hellholes. And there are 3 main driving factors here. There's anchoring, where plaintiffs' lawyers are allowed to suggest very high damage awards to the juries, and that becomes the starting point in their mind. And so a lot of these hellholes courts allow plaintiffs' lawyers to anchor, and so that just drives up the verdicts. You also have third-party litigation finance, which is playing a role. It prevents, or it makes it harder for cases to settle, and plaintiffs are looking to maximize their payouts because of this lending. And then lastly, we have the reptile theory, where businesses are villainized and the juries see them as a threat, and so they want to award more damages to the plaintiff and drives up the final verdict. We also saw RICO suits filed by Uber and Ford in LA that highlighted excessive fraud occurring, whether it be plaintiffs' lawyers working with the pre-selected medical providers to treat non-existent injuries to drive up dollar amounts, or in the case of one filed by Ford, it involved lemon law issues and falsifying timesheets by the plaintiffs' lawyers.
And we're starting to see that in some of the other jurisdictions too, I think, as we go down the list.
We are.
Which is a positive fight back by a lot of the companies now.
Exactly. The businesses feel like they don't have any other options. And so this is their last defense against the fraud that we're seeing. And so, yes, that is definitely a new trend that we have seen in several of the hellholes this year. Other issues in California, there's novel liability theories, especially around data privacy and other tech issues. Small businesses are frequent targets of predatory ADA lawsuits. You have serial plaintiffs filing cookie cutter lawsuits against these small businesses. And there's ongoing attacks on arbitration, which really is threatening an essential tool needed to resolve disputes fairly and efficiently. And the courts are making it more difficult and less available. At number 2, we have New York City, and this is another case where RICO lawsuits that have been filed are shining a spotlight on what they call the fraudemic, which is extensive lawsuit abuse that's occurring in city's courts. And unfortunately, judges, rather than holding these plaintiffs' lawyers accountable for fraudulent suits, they are turning a blind eye and not issuing any, they're not solving the problem. They're letting the plaintiffs' lawyers getting away from it. We're seeing trip and fall schemes, staged accidents, fake construction injuries. It's a really extensive problem in the courts right now. These courts also are prolific producers of nuclear verdicts. It was at a time where there was a de facto $10 million cap on non-economic damages that was recognized by New York courts. That's no more. They have blown past that cap, and nuclear verdicts are becoming more of the norm. You also see abusive ADA litigation. However, some of the federal courts are starting to push back, which is encouraging, and the state remains a hotbed for asbestos litigation. And I will also flag that Governor Hochul has proven to be a bit of a backstop for us. She has prioritized reforms recently to address the insurance fraud in the state. And she has also vetoed problematic legislation for 3 or 4 straight years now. So I do want to recognize that the role that she is trying to play in addressing some of these problems.
And I think she just signed the transparency in litigation funding law a couple weeks ago.
Yes,
which is a huge step. So absolutely.
Huge step. So she is a bit of an advocate, which is encouraging, especially in a state like New York. At number 3, we have South Carolina asbestos litigation, a very niche issue. And this is really being driven by former Supreme Court Justice Jean Toll, who was appointed to oversee the court in 2017. Prior to her appointment, we never had any issues in the state. It was very stable. But then following her excessive decisions and her extreme decisions, it appeared on the list for the first time in 2020. And sources say that South Carolina had a 300% increase in asbestos case filings from 2024 to 2025. So plaintiffs' lawyers across the country are really looking to capitalize on her plaintiff-friendly rulings. At number 4, we have another sort of niche issue, which is Louisiana coastal litigation. And this is a problem. This is litigation that has been plaguing the state for almost 10 years. There's over 40 some cases filed. However, this year, we had the first case go to verdict, and it resulted in a $744 million nuclear verdict out of the Plaquemine Parish. And this case is currently being reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And ATRA actually filed an amicus brief in this case and is paying close attention to it. Oral arguments were held last Monday, and the main issue is whether this litigation belongs in state court or federal court under the Federal Officer Removal Act. And the reason ATRA is involved is because of the Louisiana court's placement on our Hellholes list. The Louisiana plaintiffs' lawyers have cozied up to state leaders. Governor Landry is a supporter of theirs. He's received thousands of dollars in campaign contributions. So it's really problematic, and the state courts are dripping with political bias. So we just don't think it's a fair environment for litigation of this great importance. Number 5, we have Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. And as I mentioned at the outset, this court was previously number 1 for the past 2 years. And Fortunately, the drop in ranking really isn't reflective of any improvements in the state. It's really because of a decrease in activity and just the abuses that are occurring in other states. Philadelphia was home to two of the top 10 largest corporate verdicts in 2024, including the third largest product liability verdict, which was a $2.2 billion award in a roundup case. We didn't see the same volume of nuclear verdicts in 2025 as previous years, but folks on the ground say that that's largely due to companies settling and not wanting to roll the dice in the courts because they've become just so unfair and terrible that they would rather settle these cases. Uber filed a RICO case here as well, again, alleging that plaintiffs' firms are conspiring with local healthcare professionals to fabricate and exaggerate plaintiffs' injuries. So we're following that. As you mentioned, RICO cases were a real theme this year throughout the report, and we saw that in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Complex Litigation Center is also still attracting nationwide litigation. They designated 2 new mass torts this year for hair relaxer and talc powder. So it's definitely one of those, if you build it, they will come. This is going to open the doors and encourage filings in those 2 areas, and we'll pay attention to those numbers. The courts still allow forum shopping. They have expansive medical liability due to some rule changes a few years ago, and it remains a hotbed for asbestos litigation. Number 6, we have St. Louis, and a new issue in St. Louis was this out-of-town ADA litigation targeting small businesses in the city. Two plaintiffs' lawyers from Kansas City have set their sights on St. Louis small businesses and are filing abusive litigations. That was a concern. And again, their courts are still prolific producers of nuclear verdicts. And another real problem in St. Louis is that they allow junk science to fuel the litigation and serve as a foundation for many of their cases. Number 7, we have a trio of Illinois counties. We have Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties. And these counties are home to a disproportionate amount of the state's nuclear verdicts. And most often they're coming out of Cook County. And Cook County filings account for 47% of the state's total civil docket. So it's no wonder they're going there. They're trying to capitalize on the Hellholes status. The counties are ground zero for harmful baby formula litigation that's based on junk science. And of great concern is a bill that was passed last year by the legislature that will encourage even more litigation tourism. They passed this problematic jurisdiction bill that will open up courts to cases with really little connection to the state. And so again, it's going to be a magnet for plaintiffs' lawyers from across the country. We continue to see high filings in the area of Biometrics Information Privacy Act and the Genetic Information Privacy Act. And they see a lot of asbestos filings as well. Madison and St. Clair were the top 2 jurisdictions for asbestos filings in 2025.
And with the driver facing cameras, Lauren, that biometrics potential exposure is huge for the trucking industry.
It is. And, they passed a reform in last year, and we have seen we've seen a dip in number because it's now it changes how you count the number of claim or problems there.
How many violations are,
Thank you. How many violations, and so that we have seen some improvements in the numbers, but we'll see if that continues or if the plaintiffs' lawyers figure out new loopholes to get around that and continue to capitalize.
Sure.
At number 8, we have the King County and Washington Supreme Court. And so King County was a newcomer to the list last year, and it is joined in 2025 with the Washington Supreme Court because the court reinstated a nuclear verdict and opened the door to junk science in abusive PCB litigation. And an additional part of this decision was the high court selectively applied laws of Missouri to permit punitive damages that typically aren't available in Washington courts. So they did law shopping to figure out which state laws to use in order to give the plaintiffs the best outcome. King County is also home to novel climate change litigation and is really leading the charge against oil and gas companies. And this again is not an issue that just impacts corporate defendants and plaintiffs' lawyers. The Washington residents are feeling the financial impact of their lawsuit abuse. They are paying the second highest tort tax in the nation. And so it's a real concern and needs to be addressed. We're going to move on to the watch list. And this year's watch list had the most jurisdictions that we've had in a while. And some of it was for good reason, some was good news, and some was bad. Georgia, there's a trio of Georgia counties on the list: Cobb, Fulton, and Gwinnett counties. And Georgia had been a perennial hellhole. They had been number one just a few years ago. And then this past year, we had the landmark package of reforms to address longstanding issues. And so we moved them off the Hellholes list for that reason. But these counties are still of concern. They've been particularly problematic in recent years, and they've issued some of the largest nuclear verdicts in the nation. So the onus is really on these judges and judges across the state to apply the new laws and restore fairness. So we're going to keep an eye to see how they handle cases moving forward.
Lauren, something I'm sure that you've seen, we revel in the tort reform and are thrilled by it, but how many times has it been judicially undermined after it's been, adopted by the legislature in general, not just here in Georgia, but across the country?
That is certainly something we keep an eye on. We are prepared to push back by filing amicus and protecting these laws in any way we can, but that is definitely a concern, especially in these hellhole states where you do see some positive reforms enacted. That there's a risk that the courts are going to overturn them or just refuse to apply them as intended. Some other good news: Pennsylvania Supreme Court, that had been a co-hellhole with the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas for several years, but this year they had a relatively quiet year. The court did strengthen the doctrine of forum nonconvenience to help rein in some of the forum shopping we've been seeing in the state, but it also restricted the availability of arbitration in certain cases. And there are several significant cases that remain pending, so we're watching to see where the court falls on these important issues, and then that will determine what's next for the court. The third area, or the third state on this list, I really want to focus on, and that's Texas. And this is a real concern because for years, Texas has stood as the gold standard for balanced courts and a fair civil justice system. But in recent years, we're starting to see some cracks in that foundation, and we're starting to see some concerning trends in the trial courts. There's a development of a growing reputation for plaintiff leanings and nuclear verdicts. And then compounding these concerns, you have an attorney general in AG Ken Paxton that is launching a wave of industry targeted lawsuits under the Make America Healthy Again banner. And for ATRA, what is very concerning about his litigation is that he is awarding lucrative contracts worth millions of dollars to his political allies in the plaintiff's bar. So he is shipping out, he's bringing them in and letting them drive the litigation in his state, and that's very concerning.
Those of us in trucking saw this over the last several years, the Werner case down there. $95 million verdict at trial, affirmed by the trial court, affirmed by the next appellate level. And it took years and I'm sure millions of dollars of litigation to get justice from the state Supreme Court that said, "What, are you kidding me? The car came across the lane in front of a truck going under the speed limit? What
right. What are we doing?"
Yeah. But
and
you're right.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the Texas Supreme Court is still a very strong court. Absolutely. And very fair. However, they can't review every single decision. Yeah. And so, yes, maybe ultimately years down the road, we get the right result, but we can't, like I said, they can't review every decision, and you can't wait years. A lot of these businesses don't have the money to, pay all these appellate fees. So it's an important time for the state, and they need to really decide which direction they want to go. Next, we have Michigan Supreme Court. They were previously ranked number 8 on the Hellholes list last year, but they moved to the watch list this year largely because of some high-profile decisions that have not yet been released. So we're hoping to get some good results there, and then maybe they can be removed altogether. And number 5, we have Louisiana, and we separated the coastal litigation out this year because Louisiana did enact some reforms in 2025 that are meant to address particular abuses in the state's civil justice system. So we're going to monitor those reforms to see if they move the needle and if they have the desired impact. But we also still have an environment that breeds fraud. We have fallout from Operation Sideswipe that continues, those fraudulent staged accidents against truckers. And then we also have copycat fraudulent scheme was uncovered in another Louisiana parish. So hopefully the state will continue to address this and we can move them off the list, but it's certainly too soon to make that decision. And lastly, we have Kentucky. They found themselves on the watch list after a 1-year hiatus. Trial courts across the state awarded nuclear verdicts, and there were a few liability expanding decisions that created concern, so we put them back on the list this year. So these are some of the trends we saw, and we've talked through many of these. You have nuclear verdicts, again, anchoring, reptile theory, third-party litigation finance, all drivers of these verdicts that we're seeing. Junk science serving as the foundation for much of the litigation. And we have judges that are abandoning their role as gatekeepers and allowing the jury to hear the junk science. We also have abusive no injury litigation and serial plaintiffs filing cookie cutter lawsuits, specifically in the space of ADA law. We have forum shopping. Plaintiffs' lawyers want to file their cases in the hellholes to take advantage of the pro-plaintiff reputation and the prevalence of nuclear verdicts in those jurisdictions. And then lastly, the RICO lawsuits. And as I mentioned, companies are really left with no other option. So this is their main defense. And yes, it's not ideal, but they feel like this is a way that they can fight back against the abuse if no one else in the state is going to stand up for them. There are 2 additional closer look sections that we included in this year's report. And these closer look sections are meant to highlight emerging national trends and areas that we think are going to play a role in the future. So the first is the fight against junk science. This past December marked the 2-year anniversary of the Federal Rules Committee adopting a heightened standard for expert evidence and strengthening that judge's gatekeeping role or responsibility. And so since this implementation of the rule, we've seen some good and we've seen some bad. We had some positive developments in the Federal Circuit, the 8th Circuit, and the 5th Circuit this year. And then we had a mixed bag from the 9th Circuit. They issued this really positive decision first, and we were really excited about it. But then a month later, they sort of walked it back. So we're looking to future cases to see where they're going to lean more, and hopefully they'll go in the right direction. And then we also had some problematic rulings from the 4th Circuit and the 11th Circuit, where judges abandoned their roles as gatekeeper and they fell on the side of allowing junk science in. This remains a central issue for ATRA, and we're going to continue highlighting it throughout the year. And then the second area is this proliferation of private rights of action. And in recent years, we have observed a significant uptick in the inclusion of new private rights of action in legislation. And this has not only occurred in, typical states with a history of such laws, like a state like Colorado. I think they had 45 bills last year that included private rights of action. But it's also occurring in states that are known for their leadership in tort reform. This is a real problem in Texas, a real problem in West Virginia. And those are both states with strong histories of reform. So we are keeping an eye on it, monitoring legislation and flagging these bills for those in the states that include the problematic provisions. Sometimes they're hard to see, but we want to draw people's attention to what is occurring and make sure that we're not dramatically increasing the number of POAs in state legislatures. I encourage everyone to read the report, dig into it more deeply. There's the website, and there's some points of light in there, some good news if anyone's feeling overwhelmed by all of the bad news out there. But yes, just encourage you to take a look for yourself, and if there's particular jurisdictions you're interested in, do a deep dive there.
Let me second that, Lauren, because the report itself is a wealth of information and education on the issues we face, explanation of some of these issues as to how they occur and what they're doing. Must reading for everybody who's involved in the industry. Great report, as always.
Thank you.
Lauren Sheets, Jarrell, thank you again.
Thanks, Dad.